Effectively, it was a monologue, I think, from Michael Adebolajo. One particular part of the videotaped interview, we timed it at 37 minutes without a single question prompting him from the police officers at that point. It was nonetheless gripping stuff, though, because this was, of course, a description of what had happened that day on the 22nd of May when Lee Rigby was attacked in the street outside Woolwich Barracks in southeast London, and of course a description of what motivates, in his own words, Michael Adebolajo. And at one point he became very emotional during this police interview where he was talking about being absolutely disgusted by the death of innocent Muslims in Muslim lands and the rape of Muslim women. He said that was something that disgusts him. He said directly to the police officers that were interviewing him that if that doesn't disgust you, then you are wicked men. He then went on to talk about his beliefs, the fact that he had no time for politicians. He singled out particularly Tony Blair, who he said was an evil man. He also said that David Cameron was trying to follow in Tony Blair's footsteps. And then, referring more relevantly to the events on the 22nd of May, he said this: "It is not my wish as a British man that I enter a road, perhaps, which I may have walked before, brushing shoulders with the same people perhaps I have done before. It brings me little joy to approach anybody and slay them. Can you believe me," he says, "it gives me very little joy. I'm not a man who gains enjoyment from watching horror movies. This is not my character," he said to the police officers, Kay.
Was he actually directly asked, though, Mark, whether he killed Lee Rigby?
Yes, he was asked about the events surrounding Lee Rigby. At that point, though, he just looked down and he almost read a statement that could have come from a police officer describing the events. It was somewhat detached, it felt like, in the court. As he said, Lee Rigby was killed on the 22nd of May. He was struck in the neck with a sharp implement, and it was sawed until his head, became almost detached. And may Allah forgive me if I acted in a way that is displeasing to him. At that point, or shortly after, he got to his feet. He wanted a break. The police officers tried to get him to stay, but he left the room. I should add as well, Kay, throughout the interview, he was sat in a room at Southwark Police Station with a blue blanket over his head, really obscuring his face and his head for much of the time. But at certain points, when he became particularly animated, his blanket would slip back and you could see him in full flow. But for a lot of the time, his face and his head covered by that blanket.